Is Cape Coral's rental market a good market to invest in? Well, I'm sure you've read the stats. There's 9,000 short-term rental listings in Cape Coral right now. Occupancy just hit its lowest point in 4 years. Plus, we have the rules that changed this past January, and most investors I know don't even know about it yet. And most of what you've read online about this market is already outdated. So, is Cape Coral a good rental market? That's actually the wrong question. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why. So here's what I hear constantly. Someone leaves a comment, someone DMs me, someone sits down at my table and says, Jamie, should I buy a rental property in Cape Coral? I heard Airbnb is huge down there. And the assumptions underneath that question is almost always the same. Cape Coral equals easy, short-term rental money because of the canals, the sunshine, and of course, the snowbirds. Buy a house, throw it on Airbnb, collect those checks. Passive income, baby. But to know the truth to that question, we have to dig in just a little bit more. Because the Cape Coral rental market is not just one market. It's actually three completely different strategies that perform completely differently depending on your property, your location within the city, and how you're operating your business. And there is no single right answer. Get the match right, and Cape Coral can genuinely be a strong investment. Get it wrong, and now you're holding a property that costs you money every single month. I sell real estate in Cape Coral every day. I work with investors, landlords, property managers, and snowbirds who are actually renting these homes. So I know what the real numbers look like in this market. Not what a spreadsheet projects, not what a calculator spits out, although we do have one of those. The actual numbers, and that is what I'm going to give you in this video. Here's exactly what we're covering today. We'll start with the regulation landscape because the rules just changed, and this is the thing that blindsides out-of-state buyers the most right now. Then I'm going to walk you through each of the three rental strategies: long-term, short-term, and seasonal. We're going to go through these one at a time with real numbers, real costs, and my honest take on who each one is actually right for. So let's get into it. Before we talk strategy, though, we need to talk about the rules because the regulations here in Cape Coral have just changed effective January 1st, 2026. And I am already seeing investors get caught off guard because they didn't do their research 6 or 8 months ago and assumed nothing had changed. If you've been Googling Cape Coral short-term rental regulations, there's a good chance you found information saying that it's a one-time $35 registration fee. That is no longer accurate. Under the new ordinance, the city of Cape Coral now requires annual registration for all residential rental properties. For long-term rentals, which they consider with a lease longer than 6 months, the annual fee is $35. Short-term rentals, though, anything less than 6 months, that includes seasonal rentals, that registration fee has jumped up to $350 a year. Every year, ongoing. And the fee is honestly the least of it because now there are 2 layers of licensing required. Before the city will even let you process your registration, you need to first register at the state level with DDPR, the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. You're going to get what's called a transient public lodging establishment license. So you're going to go to the state first and then the city. And the city isn't waiting around for y'all to do this. The city is actively using software to find properties listed on Airbnb and VRBO that aren't properly registered. And if they find you, you get the first violation is a $1,000 fine, second violation is a $2,000 fine. On top of that, there's now a 7-day minimum stay requirement in Cape Coral for short-term rentals. So you legally cannot offer a 2-night or weekend stay in most residential zones. They are paying attention to this and already enforcing it. So here's one piece that I really want you to hear though, because this one costs investors real money. Even if you get your city registration, even if you have your state license, even if you're doing everything right at the government level, your HOA can still shut you down. HOA deed restrictions and covenants typically supersede city ordinances, and a lot of communities here in Cape Coral that have an HOA are prohibiting rentals under 6 months, period. So the reason that I'm starting here with these regulations isn't to scare you away from the market. It's because these rules determine now which strategy is even available to you on a given property. Once you know the landscape up front, everything else that follows makes a lot more sense. All right, now that we've got those rules out of the way, let's talk about the 3 strategies, starting with the most straightforward one and honestly, the safe play for most people, and that is the long-term rental. When we're talking about long-term rental, we're talking the traditional model, a 12-month lease, one tenant, one predictable monthly check. Just to give you an idea, in Cape Coral right now, a 3 or 4 bedroom single family home in a long-term lease is renting for roughly about $2,300 to $3,000 a month. It's going to depend on location, condition, and whether or not it has pool and water access. But annualized, that's around $27,000 to $36,000 a year in gross income. So here for the long-term rental strategy actually starts to look attractive when you stack it up against the other models. Your city registration is $35 a year. That's it from a compliance standpoint. You don't have to pay tourism taxes. There's no 11% tax hit on your gross income the way there is with short-term rentals. Property management, if you hire somebody to handle the tenant relationship and maintenance calls, runs you about 8 to 10% of monthly rent. So roughly $200 to $250 a month on a $2,500 rent. Turnover costs exist, but they're infrequent. Your main fixed costs are your mortgage, property taxes, insurance, and then the occasional maintenance call. And let's talk occupancy for a second, because this is an important comparison point. The short-term rental market citywide in Cape Coral ran a 53.6 occupancy rate in 2024. That means the average listing was sitting empty almost half the time. A long-term rental, one with a tenant, your occupancy is effectively 100% when it's priced correctly. You're not tracking nightly availability. You have one tenant, they're there, the rent comes in every month. That predictability is worth something real. But of course, we have to address the downside, and that is Cape Coral long-term rents have dropped roughly 10 to 11% over the past year. A significant amount of new construction has hit the market, post-hurricane rebuilds, new inventory from investors who bought in 2021, 2022, and all of that has created more supply, and that supply is pushing long-term rents down. So the income that feels stable on a 12-month lease is also the income that's been getting squeezed the most recently. But all in all, long-term rentals make the most sense in a few specific scenarios. If your property is located with limited vacation rental demand, so let's think northern Cape Coral, landlocked areas away from the core of tourist zones, long-term gives you a reliable tenant without fighting for bookings that aren't really coming your way anyway. It's also the right call if you want the lowest friction, lowest cost to operate model possible with no tourism tax, no short-term rental compliance headaches, and no weekly turnover management. And if you're a first-time investor, getting your footing in this market, long-term is a solid starting point before you take on the complexity of running a hospitality operation. It's obviously not the most exciting strategy, but it's also the one that's least likely to blow up on you. All right, so we've got long-term as our stable baseline. Now let's go to the other end of the spectrum, the short-term rentals. And let's look at what the numbers actually show when you stop projecting and start looking at what's really happening in the market. So when we're talking short-term rentals in Cape Coral, we're talking weekly vacation booking, the Airbnb and VRBO model, with a minimum 7-night stay under the city ordinance. And when this works, it works really well. The average annual gross revenue across all active short-term rental listings in Cape Coral is roughly $46,000 a year. Top performing properties, those ones that are in the right location with the right amenities, professionally managed with dynamic pricing, those can gross $60,000 to $90,000 or more. That ceiling is real and it's achievable, but the path to that ceiling is a lot more specific than most people going in understand. So let me give you my honest market picture first. In 2021 and 2022, the pandemic boom years, Cape Coral's short-term rental occupancy was running around 64%. That was an exceptional window. That data is coming straight from AirDNA. Don't close the tab on that just yet, because that number needs context. Top performing properties, so those on waterfront with a heated pool, dynamically priced, professionally managed, Those can hit 70 to 85% occupancy during peak season. But the average listing is not a top performer. And if you are projecting your investment return using top performer numbers for an average property, you are going to come up very, very short. So what drove this decline in occupancy? Supply. There's nearly 9,000 active listings right now competing for the same pool of guests that the market had when there were far fewer properties. The market matured fast. The easy money window is behind us now, but that doesn't mean that the short-term rental model is broken. It means you really have to earn it now. So let's take a look at what the revenue actually looks like by property type. Take a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home with a pool, no waterfront access in Southwest Cape Coral. A very common investor profile. You're looking at roughly $3,000 to $3,500 a month averaged across a full year. But that average hides the swing. You might pull $6,000 in February when the snowbirds are here and nightly demand is through the roof, and you might do $1,500 in September when bookings start to fall off the cliff. The annual revenue is real, but it is not evenly distributed. You have to be able to weather the low months with cash from the high ones. Now add direct canal access and a boat dock to the same property and everything changes. The nightly rate premium for waterfront access alone is $50 to $150 a night. A heated pool adds another $30 to $80. Those aren't small numbers when you're multiplying them across a full booking calendar. Now let's talk about what it actually costs to rent a short-term rental, because this is where most of the passive income projections fall apart. So let's start with the tax obligation, because this is one that surprises most everyone. Every short-term rental in Cape Coral is subject to a 6% Florida sales tax plus a 5% Lee County tourist development tax. That is 11% of your gross rental income going to the government before you've paid any other expense. And on $46,000 gross, that's over $5,000 just right off the top. Long-term rental, zero, none. It's one of the biggest financial differences between these two models, and it almost never shows up in the YouTube projections. Property management for short-term rentals runs 12 to 18% of the gross revenue compared to 8 to 10% for the long term. And it should, because managing weekly turnovers, guest communications, dynamic pricing, cleaning crews, and the maintenance on a fast cycle is genuinely intensive work. On a $46,000 gross, you're looking at $5,500 to $8,000 in management fees. Then you add the cleaning costs per turnover, supply restocking, and the maintenance reality most people don't think about. Rental properties take more wear and tear than a primary residence, and down here in Florida, with our heat, humidity, and saltwater air, that just accelerates everything. And insurance is another number that catches out-of-state buyers off guard. Homeowners insurance on a single family home in Cape Coral can run anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 or more per year, depending on your flood zone and construction type. And if you're running short-term rentals, your standard homeowner's policy likely doesn't cover commercial rental activity. So you may need an additional short-term rental specific policy on top of that. So let's run the full math. Take your projected gross revenue, subtract 11% for taxes, subtract 15% for management, subtract insurance, subtract property taxes, subtract your mortgage, what's left? That is your actual return. And when you're honest with all of that, the properties that come out looking strong are very specific ones. Direct waterfront access, Southern Cape Coral, professionally managed, dynamic pricing. But the ones that look weak are the landlocked properties someone's projected using AirDNA averages. But short-term rental is the right strategy when you have a direct or sailboat access waterfront property with a heated pool in the southern part of Cape Coral. And when you're willing to treat it as a real business operation or hire a management company that will, the ceiling is genuinely high for the right kind of assets in this market. And yes, the market is competitive, occupancy has come down, and so the set it and forget it era is over. Now, before we dive into the last strategy, I know I've thrown a lot of numbers at you. So if you're trying to figure out whether a specific property will actually perform better as a long-term or short-term rental, we've actually created a calculator to help you out. It is in the description below. And it's a starting point for understanding this market before you make any investment decision. All right, let's get back into it. I told you there's 3 different strategies. We've talked about long-term and we've talked about short-term. So you're probably thinking, what else is there to talk about? So let me show you the strategy that most investors walk right past, and honestly, the one that I think is the most underrated play in this entire market. And this is the hidden sweet spot. Every October or November, the same thing starts happening in Cape Coral. People from Michigan, Ohio, Minnesota, Illinois, and of course, a lot of Canadians start making their way down here for the winter. These are retirees and families who are running from the 5 or 6 months of cold, gray, miserable weather. They want to be somewhere warm, somewhere on the water, and somewhere that feels like a real home for the season. Not a hotel room, not a vacation rental for a week, for the whole winter. And they are willing to pay serious money for that experience. So I could give you plenty of projections here, but I want to actually focus on some real numbers. I have friends from Canada who come down to Cape Coral every single winter. Last year, they were paying $8,000 a month for their place. When I saw them this year, we got to talking and they told me that their home last year is now listed at $10,000 a month. And I've personally seen seasonal rental rates in this city on the right waterfront home with a pool and a dock, and they had $16,000 a month. Those are not made up numbers. Those are real transactions that have happened in this market, and they happen every single season. So here's why the strategy is so powerful. Let me run a simple scenario. A waterfront home with a heated pool and a dock in the southern part of Cape Coral. 4 months, December to March. A Snowbird tenant pays $7,000 a month. That is $28,000 gross from one booking, one set of guests, one cleaning crew turnover at the end. Compare that to a 12-month long-term lease on the same home at $2,800 a month. That's $33,600 for the full year. The seasonal strategy generates nearly as much income in 4 months as the long-term generates in 12, with dramatically less wear and tear on the property and a fraction of the management overhead. And then you still have 8 months left in the year. That's not wasted time, that's flexible. You can run some short-term rental bookings during shoulder season for the families and remote workers. You could do month-to-month midterm leases for traveling nurses or contractors. You could use the home yourself. You can stack strategies around that one premium seasonal booking. The Snowbird lease is your anchor. Everything else is upside built on top of it. Now, here is one thing that you do need to know. Seasonal rentals of less than 6 months technically fall under the Cape Coral short-term rental definition, so you'll still need the $350 annual registration and the state DBPR license. You're still going to owe the 11% tourism tax on the income, same compliance requirements as a weekly short-term rental. But you only have one cleaning crew turnover for the season instead of 15. That is a completely different operational life. Now, don't forget that you still need to check with the HOA because some communities that would prohibit weekly Airbnb booking are fine with a 3 or 4 month furnished lease. Others prohibit anything under 6 months. So you have to know what your deed restrictions are before you build a strategy around a specific property. So what does a property actually need to command these types of rates that we're talking about with seasonal rentals? Well, first, I'm just going to say a non-negotiable is a heated pool. Snowbird guests are arriving in November when the air is in the low 70s and they want to get in that pool. It needs to be warm. Secondly, you want a fully furnished and equipped interior. So we're talking nice furniture, fully stocked kitchen, good beds, fast internet, streaming TV. That is the expectation. This is a fully furnished home, not a vacation rental shell with a couple of seasonings. Now, if you're looking to get into those higher tier rates, you're going to want to look for waterfront or canal access. And a boat dock takes it higher still. Location matters here. Southeast and Southwest Cape Coral are great because of the waterfront, but you also want to think close to restaurants, shopping, healthcare, and as easy beach access as you can get. That's where Snowbird demand is the strongest. The further north you go in the city, though, especially into those areas that are still waiting on more infrastructure, the harder it becomes to command premium seasonal rates because the lifestyle these guests are paying for is not really accessible up there. So the seasonal strategy is the right call when you have a waterfront or pool in a desirable part of the city and you want to extract peak seasonal value without running a full-time hospitality operation. It's a strategy that most out-of-state investors overlook because it doesn't really fit into the traditional Airbnb model that they came in with. It often runs through local property managers who specialize in seasonal, word of mouth, or seasonal specific platforms, not the big booking sites. But the net return, when you do the honest math, it's just really hard to beat. One premium booking anchors your most valuable 4 months. Your operating costs are a fraction of weekly short-term rental, and you have the rest of the year to build around it however makes sense for your situation. So let's bring it all together. We covered the regulation landscape, which are the rules that have changed in January of 2026. And then we walked through all three strategies with real numbers. Long-term rentals are going to be predictable, low friction, no tourism tax, lowest cost to operate, but the lowest ceiling and rents have been declining. Short-term rental is the highest revenue ceiling in this market for the right properties, but occupancy has dropped from 64% down to 53.6% citywide, and it takes real operational commitment to perform well. And the seasonal Snowbird strategy, one premium booking covering 4 months at rates that reach 8 to 10,000 with a fraction of the operational complexity of a weekly short-term rental. So you came into this video not knowing which rental strategy actually works in Cape Coral. Now you have the framework to answer that for a specific property that you're looking, not just a generic answer, a real one. The question was never, is Cape Coral a good rental market? The question is, for this property in this location with this strategy, does the math work? The investors doing well here right now are the ones who matched those three things correctly. And now you know how to do it. So 2 things before you go. If you're in the middle of your research phase and you want to understand if a certain property is going to be a good fit, we've created the rental calculator for you, where you can run a property through all 3 models to find out which one will work best for you. And if you found a property you love, then reach out to me and my team directly. We work with investors in this market every single day. We know the inventory, we know the numbers, and we will give you a straight answer. Happy investing, and we'll see you in the next one.